Hi, I'm Lina, and today I'm going to present how we expanded the concept of environmental design in Case NEA. It's a work that started in 2018, and I have lots of co-authors from Nina, NTNU, and Sintef Energy. So it's not just my work, it's a lot of people's work, and this is sort of the end result of this work. So environmental design, for those of you who don't know, was originally developed for Atlantic salmon in regulated rivers. It's a concept of trying to improve conditions for salmon and also for power production. So trying to achieve a win-win situation. In Hydrogen, we try to expand this concept by not looking just at salmon. We expand it by including other fish species. So here we use NEA, an inland river, which has trout and some other fish species. And we consider both biology, hydrology, and societal interests, human user interests, such as leisure activities, as well as hydropower production. And here you can see NEA from above. And we studied a stretch which was approximately 32 kilometers from, let me see, find my late, from this part here, which here is a reservoir and a dam. And this stretch down here we studied. And the river lets out in the Selbusjøen, a large lake. I'm going to remove this laser pen. And just to make it easier for you to see, here's a map of the same stretch. And you can see that there's a tunnel running from this reservoir, which are the gray lines. And so quite a large part of this river has deferred water. And to compensate for that, like mitigation measures, there are lots of weirs, like these blue lines. In Norwegian, it's terskel. But there are 32 weirs on this stretch. And the river was previously known for being very important for large spawning trout from the Selbu Lake coming up into this river and spawning. So it was was an important part of the trout ecosystem. However, because of all the weirs, which has been there for a while, and the reduced water flow, it has been questioned, the brown trout situation recently, in the recent years, because the population has been reduced. And we are wondering if the trout even can reach up in this river with all the weirs. In addition, you have introduced non-native species such as European minnow, ørret in Norwegian, and pike, which is gjedde. And these are both competing and eating salmon, mostly the young juveniles. Here's an example of a weir, and as you can see, it might be tricky for a spawning large brown trout to pass this barrier when the water flow is low. To investigate this, we employed several new state-of-the-art methods from different fields. One of them was, for instance, like Håkon just talked about, the green lidar, but also genetical new methods and some traditional methods. And we combined all these different types of methods to get the best possible answer and to test out these new tools. First, from a bird's point of view, this green laser, based on the green laser and all these data points, as Håkon just told you about, there was established a terrain model, and based on this terrain model, a hydraulic 2D model was set up for important part of this river. And one way to use it is it describes important habitats and conditions for fish and other aquatic animals. And you can use this data to simulate different discharges and mitigation measures. And further, taking into account social or societal needs, how the river Nea is really important for local identity, but also for tourists. And they use the river for fishing, just trips along the river, canoeing and swimming. So there's a range of different activities. So just removing these weirs might be a bad idea. And in general, people are, to test this, it was interviews with both local inhabitants and tourists were made, and also surveys. And people were in general positive to modifications of these weirs if it improved ecological conditions. And it was also, this work was done by Berit Köhler, and she also asked whether people liked the current mitigation measures. Like you can see this picture, it's actually a picture of the river being put, we call it a river in a river, because the riverbed is so large, because it's really adapted to a higher water flow, but because of the deferral of the water, one mitigation measure is to make a smaller river. And when locals and tourists were asked about this, they were quite negative to this mitigation measure. But when they received information about the purpose of it, that it was made to improve conditions for the trout, they became much more positive to this type of measure. Further, we went fishing for answers, so to speak. In this picture, you can see a trout and a small pike. And we use these fish and we sample them and took samples for genetical analysis to find out how the brown trout population is actually doing. And we could actually use these genetical samples to find out if these fish are siblings, half siblings, relatives, who their parents are. And what we found was, I apologize for this table being in Norwegian, but we found that a large amount of the juvenile fish, both the ceroplos is the trout juveniles which were born this year, but also trout that were born the year before, and the year before that were actually siblings or half siblings, and this indicates that there are quite few parents, much fewer than we would expect in such a large river system. And here it's just really, it's not easy to understand a map just showing the different connections between these sibling groups. But moving to another genetical analysis, we estimated the actual spawning population of the trout. And we looked at the juveniles which were born this year, and we found that there were 156 parents, which is a very low number. And this indicates also that these barriers, the genetical analysis shows that this population is very much fragmented, and the weirs are barriers for the genetical flow and probably also for the spawning salmon that wants to come up. The area was also mapped for potential and actual spawning habitats. These red arrows shows the existing spawning habitats where fish can spawn, and these blue lines or the blue areas. Sorry, the figure on the side here has some wrong colors, but the blue arrows shows where we have potential spawning habitats if you make some adjustment here. Because within these weirs, the water is standing quite still, and most river species, they are adapted to a more fast-flowing water current, so it's not their ideal habitat. We also investigated the biodiversity using DNA barcoding and environmental DNA, which is taking a water sample and analyzing all the genetics in it. We found that there were fewer species in the slowing flowing areas, and the EPT species are a set of groups, important invertebrates, which we use as an ecological indicator. We expect to find these species in a healthy ecosystem, and we found fewer, or in a typical river ecosystem, and we found fewer than expected. So our diagnosis now is that the spawning stock of trout is very small, it's inbred and fragmented because of the weirs are stopping the fish from moving upstream and downstream the river. However, the weirs are important for people's perception of landscape, but there's also an acceptance for changing them to improve conditions for trout and invertebrates. And without the weirs, the river would become more like a desert, like you see on this picture, because the riverbed is so wide. So we need something to keep the water there. And removing them would reduce the recreational value. The weir pools, which the weirs create, are less productive and have lower biodiversity. But NEA has several spawning areas which cannot today be utilized as they are covered by still water and sediments. But that these pools are also important in winter for survival of trout. So how can conditions be improved? Well, we have suggested in an upcoming report that we modify today's weirs. This picture here shows a river from a bow where small pools are connected with weirs, but the weirs are made such that fish can actually move up or migrate through them. And we have suggested a similar system for River Nea. And this will allow migrating trout to move up to spawning grounds. It will also re-establish unused spawning areas and maintain deeper areas for overwintering, as well as keeping the river so that it can be used for recreational activities. And here is an example of such a weir that we are talking about, a cell weir. In addition, we have also suggested a water bank, which is basically a way of using the water which is possible to use today in a smart way, so that we can use the water when for instance, during spawning migration, which is a really critical time, and we can remove this bottleneck for the fish so that they can reach the spawning grounds and produce more trout. So we think our suggestions will increase ecological conditions in the river and also remove a bottleneck for the trout population so that it can increase. Thank you very much.